You did not lose a war. You were never defeated in battle. One morning, a Roman administrator arrived in your village, scratched something into a tablet, and your name ceased to exist. This did not happen to one person. This happened to 40 million people across 3 decades. No blood required, no screaming, just ink, bureaucracy, and silence. Your father was Vercingetorix of the Arverni. The Roman census recorded him as Marcus Gaius Verus. Your children would not know his real name. Your grandchildren would not ask. Rome never called this erasure. Rome called it civilization. And the most disturbing part, within 2 generations, most of the renamed agreed. What you are about to see is not a conquest story. It is a psychology experiment, the largest in human history, and it is still running today. Rome did not simply conquer territory. It conquered identity at a scale no empire before or since has matched. Across Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, and Asia Minor, an entire administrative machine was designed to dissolve local names, repackage foreign peoples under Roman nomenclature, and manufacture loyalty through linguistic assimilation. This channel exists to expose the mechanisms of power that history textbooks reduce to footnotes. If this kind of psychological and historical forensics is what you want, subscribe right now, leave your reaction in the comments, and hit like so this reaches people who still think Rome was just about roads. Before Rome renamed you, it counted you. The census was not a population tool. It was the first weapon, a bureaucratic scalpel designed to separate a person from their inherited identity before they realized surgery had begun. Imagine a Roman official arriving at a settlement in occupied Gaul around 50 BCE. He carries wax tablets, an ink stylus, and a mandate from Rome. He does not ask your name. He assigns you one, a praenomen, a nomen, a cognomen, the Roman 3-name structure that collapsed centuries of tribal lineage into a format the empire could file and tax. The Romans called this the tria nomina. What they did not announce was its secondary function. It made your original name legally invisible. Once recorded under a Roman name, that Roman name became your binding identity in every contract, land deed, military record, and tax scroll the empire produced. Here is what makes this genuinely disturbing. Rome did not require you to stop using your native name privately. It simply made your Roman name the only one that produced legal outcomes. You could whisper your old name to your children, but the land stayed in the Roman name. The inheritance stayed in the Roman name. Existence, officially, was the Roman name. Hispania underwent this process between 200 and 100 BCE. North Africa followed. Gaul was processed in under 30 years following Caesar's campaigns. Historians estimate that by 14 CE, the year of Augustus's death, over 40 million people across the empire carried Roman names they had not chosen and could not legally abandon. The census official does not explain any of this. He writes, nods, and moves to the next household. The entire transaction takes less time than it took your grandfather to teach you your family's name. Rome trained an entire class of administrators, the tabularii, whose specific role was nomenclature processing in conquered territories. These were not soldiers, they were clerks. And clerks, Rome understood, could accomplish what legions could not. They could make a culture forget itself quietly from inside the paperwork. The most sophisticated element of the system was what Rome offered in exchange. A Roman name was not just a label, it was access. Access to courts, access to trade networks, access to citizenship pathways. The renamed were not simply erased. They were upgraded into a hierarchy that rewarded their compliance with their own assimilation. Psychologists today call this a coercive incentive structure. When the reward for surrendering identity is survival itself, resistance does not feel like resistance. It feels like irrationality. Rome did not need to punish those who refused. It simply made refusal economically invisible. But the census machine was only the infrastructure. The real operation, the one that made 40 million people not just accept Roman names but defend them, required something far more insidious than a tablet and a stylus. It required Rome to get inside the one place no army could reach, the way a conquered people talked to their own children. Rome never banned your language. It did something far more precise. It made your language economically worthless, and then waited for you to abandon it yourself. You are a merchant in newly occupied Lugdunum, modern Lyon, around 40 BCE. You speak Gaulish fluently. Your father spoke it. Your inventory, your debts, your prayers are all in Gaulish. Then Rome builds a forum. Every contract signed inside that forum must be written in Latin. Every dispute resolved there is argued in Latin. Every record that gives your transaction legal standing is Latin. Your language still works at home. It simply does not work anywhere that power lives. Linguists call this a prestige language shift. Rome engineered it with deliberate institutional design. The basilica, the law court, the army enlistment office, the grain distribution registry. Every Roman-built structure that controlled access to resources operated exclusively in Latin. The language did not spread through admiration. It spread through necessity. The element historians rarely discuss is where Rome applied the most pressure: on children. Roman provincial schools, the ludi, were established across Gaul, Hispania, and Britain within decades of conquest. Attendance was not legally compelled, but graduates of Roman schools were eligible for administrative posts, military officer tracks, and trade licenses. Non-graduates were not. The pressure fell entirely on parents. Teach your child Latin, or watch your child inherit your ceiling. Within 60 years of Caesar's Gallic campaigns, Gaulish was no longer written. Not because Rome destroyed the writing, because no one who needed to write anything useful had a reason to write it in Gaulish anymore. A language does not die when it is forbidden. It dies when the generation that speaks it stops passing it to children who need it to survive. You teach your son Latin at night in addition to Gaulish because you still believe both matter. Your son teaches his children only Latin because by then, Gaulish has no market, no court, no future attached to it. Your grandchildren do not think of this as a loss. They think of it as progress. That is precisely what Rome calculated. The Roman writer Tacitus documented this process in Britain with uncomfortable clarity. He recorded how the Roman governor Agricola deliberately promoted Latin education among the British elite, not through force, but by associating Latin fluency with sophistication and native speech with backwardness. Tacitus called it humanitas. He noted, with dry precision, that the Britons called it that too, without realizing they were describing their own subjugation. This is the mechanism that makes Rome's linguistic campaign categorically different from simple colonization. The conquered populations became active participants in erasing their own languages. Parents chose Latin schools. Merchants chose Latin contracts. Soldiers chose Latin ranks. Every individual decision was rational. The collective outcome was cultural annihilation executed entirely by the people it annihilated. Estimates from epigraphic records, inscriptions carved in stone across the empire, show that by 100 CE, Latin had displaced indigenous languages as the primary written medium across nearly the entire Western Empire. Gaulish, Iberian, Oscan, Umbrian languages with centuries of literary and ritual tradition vanished from the public record within 3 to 4 generations of Roman administrative contact. But a new name and a new language were still not enough. Rome understood something that modern behavioral scientists would spend centuries rediscovering. Identity is not just what you are called or what you speak. Identity is what you worship, what calendar you follow, and what stories you tell your children about where they came from. Rome had a system for that too. Rome did not destroy your gods. It did something far more invasive. It absorbed them, renamed them, repositioned them inside Roman theology, and handed them back to you wearing Roman faces. You kept worshiping. You just stopped knowing what you were worshiping. Roman scholars called this process interpretatio Romana, the systematic translation of foreign deities into Roman equivalents. The Gaulish god Lugh, associated with skill and light, became Mercury. The Celtic war deity Camelos was absorbed into Mars. The Iberian goddess Atacina was merged with Proserpina. Each merger was documented, institutionalized, and promoted through newly built Roman temples, erected on the exact sites where the original shrines had stood. You are a Gaulish farmer who has prayed to Epona, goddess of horses, your entire life. 1 decade after Roman occupation, a new stone temple appears at the edge of your village. The priests inside call the goddess by a Roman name, perform Roman rituals, and conduct ceremonies in Latin. But the figure carved above the altar, a woman seated between 2 horses, looks exactly like what your grandmother described. You enter. You pray. Rome has not replaced your faith. It has rehoused it inside Roman architecture, and you paid the temple tax to get through the door. Epona is one of the rare cases where the original name survived, because her cult spread into the Roman military itself and became too embedded to rename. But that survival was the exception that proves the method. When a local deity was useful to Rome, Rome adopted it. When it was not, it disappeared from the official record within a generation, leaving communities praying to a Roman name for a god they no longer had accurate words to describe. The calendar was the next target. Every conquered culture organized its sacred year around its own agricultural and spiritual rhythms, festivals, planting ceremonies, ancestral remembrance days tied to specific seasons and local geography. Rome replaced these with the Julian calendar and its imperial festival cycle. The dates moved, the names changed. The emotional content, harvest gratitude, ancestral reverence, communal ritual, was transferred intact into Roman festivals that pointed toward Roman gods and Roman emperors. Your great-grandmother celebrated a midsummer fire festival to honor the spirits of the land. Your grandmother celebrated something similar, but the Roman administrator recorded it as a local variant of the Vestalia. Your mother attended a Roman temple ceremony on the same date. You observed the same date as a public holiday, whose origin you have never been told. The feeling of the day is unchanged. Everything that produced that feeling has been replaced. Archaeologists excavating Romano-British temple sites have found layers of deliberate architectural overwriting. Roman foundations built directly onto the footprints of Iron Age ritual enclosures with a precision that could not be accidental. Rome's religious engineers were not destroying sacred space. They were inheriting its emotional charge and redirecting it. A place that generations had experienced as holy continued to feel holy. It now made Rome feel holy by association. The psychological mechanism here is one that behavioral scientists now call identity anchoring through ritual continuity. When the physical experience of worship, the location, the season, the communal gathering, remains constant, while the theological content shifts incrementally. The emotional attachment transfers to the new framework without triggering the grief response that outright replacement would cause. Rome did not ask you to stop feeling. It redirected what those feelings pointed toward. By the 2nd century CE, the Roman imperial cult had added a final layer: emperor worship. Living rulers were declared divine. Statues of emperors were installed in temples alongside gods. Provincial populations were required to perform ritual gestures of loyalty to the emperor's image during public ceremonies. Refusing was not framed as political dissent. It was framed as impiety, a spiritual failing. Rome had made loyalty to the state indistinguishable from loyalty to the sacred. A new name, a new language, a new god. 3 decades of administrative pressure, linguistic incentive, and spiritual rehousing. And still, Rome had not reached the deepest layer. Because the most durable part of any identity is not what you are called, or what you speak, or what you worship. It is the story you tell about who you were before. Rome had a final operation for that too, and it was the one that has never stopped running. Rome's final weapon was the archive. By outlawing the Druidic memory keepers and replacing oral history with Latin documentation, Rome became the only institution left with the authority to describe conquered peoples to themselves, and it described them exactly as conquest required: chaotic, primitive, grateful. Within 3 generations, Romanized populations were defending the empire that had erased them. Not because they were forced to, because they had forgotten there was anything to defend before Rome arrived. The operation was complete the moment the conquered stopped asking what they had been before the census official knocked. 4 systems, 1 name, 1 language, 1 god, 1 approved past. Rome did not need 40 million people to love it. It needed them to become unimaginable without it. And that is precisely what 40 million people became. The word Rome used for this was civilization. The word still works. The question this history forces into the present is not academic. Which parts of your identity, your name, your language, your beliefs, your version of the past, were handed to you by an institution that had reasons to hand you exactly that and not something else? Rome counted on you never asking that question. Drop your answer in the comments. And if this video reached something real in you, share it. The algorithm buries this kind of content. Your share is the only road out of the archive.